All right, guy, you ready?
Backwardstracking Raffheim, track by track, catalogs bands influential to listen, second to take friends old to where the show the backtracking to welcome. Sorry, I was learning Arabic and I'm used to reading right to left. Welcome to Backtracking, the show where two old friends take a second listen to influential bands' catalogs, track by track. I'm Roth Bagdasarian.
And I'm Dan Fiden. We'll be taking this journey together, providing context, both personal and historical, on some legendary bands. For our first season, we've picked none other than Rush.
The office door closed early. Hidden bottle came out.
Today on Backtracking, stop, hey, what's that sound? It's a shitload of Rush ephemera going round. Although we're nearly finished covering every one of Rush's 19 studio albums, that's not enough Rush for us. So today we're going to tackle every one of the band's live albums following a show of hands, plus Geddy and Alex's solo efforts, and the band's covers EP, Feedback. We've got our hands full.
We sure do, Roth. We're going to set our own time machine back to 1996, when Lurk's solo album Victor was released. Then we'll move on to 1998's live album, Different Stages. Next, we'll jump ahead to 2000 with the release of Dirk's My Favorite Headache. Our next stop will be 2003's live album, Rush in Rio, before moving on to 2004's covers EP, Feedback. From there, we'll skip ahead to 2008's Snakes and Arrows Live, and then to 2009's Grace Under Pressure Live. And if we can cover all of that in less than 2 hours, I will be pleased.
And so will the fans. But to give us the best chance of actually completing this task, we're going to be skipping a big old bunch of concert videos released during this time period. R30, Time Machine, Clockwork Angels Live, R40, and Time Stands Still. If we wanted to include those, we'd have to be hanging out in a pleasure dome eating honeydew, if you catch my drift.
So what else was happening from 1996 to 2009? A lot. Get an encyclopedia and check it out for yourself.
100,000 years, 100,000 miles of track, 100,000 tears.
So Dan,
Yes.
I don't know if you're hip to this. I don't know if you're privy to what the kids are all jiving on, but
I'm very Roth. I'm extremely hip.
so there's
ahead.
There's a thing called the internet. So they don't need an encyclopedia. They can get a Wikipedia.
No. An encyclopedia is the appropriate thing. Okay, so Roth, personal anecdote. Here's a little bit of the personal context here.
Mm-hmm.
In the year, speaking of what happened between 96 and 2009,
Yeah.
during that time, I had my first post-college job, which, as you may remember, was working for a video game company that made that game You Don't Know Jack. And I wrote, my kind of first job there was I wrote questions for the game, trivia questions.
Uh-huh.
Right?
Yeah.
Along with witticisms, various witticisms. Okay. And when I had that job, would you believe we had to use physical books to find the trivia? It was like the internet kind of sort of existed, but there was no Wikipedia. It was basically a bunch of GeoCities pages and stuff.
So would you sit there like in like a lounge or a Shea lounge reading a book and they'd be like, what are you doing? Napping on a job, and you'd say, I'm working.
There was no shades, but literally we had a library. So it'd be like, but we kind of, the way the job worked was all the writers we had, I can't remember, there was a quota of questions you had to write a week, but it was like you had to get 20 questions approved by the editors a week. And so they could throw out questions because they were just like, the trivia was too hard. It was too
What if
easy.
they had been used before? Was it like a database you could easily search to find out if you'd used it?
Yeah, so the whole game was made in HyperCard, if you remember HyperCard. But so we had a database in HyperCard that we would write into that stored all the questions. But basically we'd have to get 20 questions approved a week, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
like
so
FileMaker.
in the middle of the week, we would, after you wrote a few questions that maybe you thought over the weekend, like Tuesday, Wednesday, you'd be like, all right, I've got to find trivia that I feel like I can write a funny trivia question about. And so we had all these reference books in a library in the office. And then sometimes people would be like, anybody want to go to Barnes and Noble? And then we'd just go to Barnes and Noble and sit in Barnes and Noble for like the afternoon, like picking up random books. But we had these like medical oddity books, bunch of encyclopedias. And that was
now, were you looking for specific categories, or were they just whatever floated your boat?
Well, I mean, listen, if you've ever played that video game, you can probably guess. The really obvious wells that we would kind of pull from were a lot of bodily function trivia, fart trivia, a lot of 70s and 80s TV show trivia, right? Fucking pre-internet. Do you believe it?
No, I mean, the internet existed then. It's just that it was but
there was just there was no Wikipedia.
I remember going to the Sun terminals. There was the Sun computer lab at the computer station at the school, the university, right? And you go in there, you have a big CRT monitor, and in one half of the window, you'd have your VAX prompt opened up, and you'd be opened up like a Vim editor, and you'd be coding in HTML. And the other one, you'd have Nutscrape Never Get There open up, and you'd do a refresh on your URL, and it had a tilde in the name with your username, and that's how you actually saw what you were doing.
Yeah. Making web pages.
Yeah. It was pretty fascinating. Yeah. No JavaScript, just pure HTML.
I know. All right. So Roth, listen, ephemera, we have a lot to cover. So enough of this bullshit. We're already behind the 8 ball. We need to figure out how we're going to navigate our way through all of this shit. I guess the best way to start, Roth, is to just dive in. Yeah.
Let's do it. So the very first album, do you want to introduce it?
I do want to introduce it. The first album, we're going to go in maybe here's the bit of housekeeping that we'll do this week. We're going to go in chronological order. We could have done this by like cover the 2 solo albums, then cover all the live albums, then like, the EP. But I figured that the cleanest way to do it would be to go in chronological order. We are going by release date. So Rafi, Alex Lifeson released a solo album. He recorded and released a solo album. It is released under his name. The name of the album is Victor. It was released in January 1996.
It was.
He recorded it in 94, late 94, early 95. So just to put that in Rush context, Rafi, what albums was the band? This is a little trivia for you. What albums was the band working on during that interval?
It would have been Test for Echo.
Post Counterparts, pre-Test for Echo.
Yeah.
So that puts us in the grand chronology of Rush. So Ruff, I'll go through the track list just to refresh everyone's memories who doesn't have Victor on repeat on their iPod, which I'm sure is most people. So track 1, Don't Care, Promise, Start Today, Mr. X, At the End, Sending Out a Warning, Shut Up, Shutting Up, Strip and Go Naked, The Big Dance, Victor, and finally, I Am the Spirit. So, Ralph, tell me, what are your impressions of this album? How should we think about it? Please take us to school.
Okay, I'm glad you asked, Dan. I was worried you wouldn't get to the album. I was worried you're just going to keep talking about politics, but I'm glad you got back on track. So last week, if you recall, when I mentioned Victor, I was like, oh God, Victor, I rolled my eyes. And I have to be completely honest with you. Not that I haven't been honest this entire time. In fact, I haven't. This is the first bit of honesty.
To be a liar, but go ahead.
So I never really got through this album ever until I was compelled through compulsory obligation by Backtracking to listen to it. And the reason why is because the first couple of tracks are kind of trite and meh and like a little, like I just like it not good. I don't know why they put them up front. I think at the time they were sort of like, it was a sort of metal era, like right around grungy time, but it was just, it felt like a bad hair metal band almost, right? It didn't sound so much like that, but it just felt like it. And then when I listened to it, when I got to track 3 and 4 in the middle, then I was like, wow, like I actually really dig this stuff. So there's a lot of different styles of music in this album, and it opens, and there's some of this like rockin' kind of with a singing voice, right? This guy, I don't know who sings on it. I honestly don't know much about the personnel. But
do you want me to give you a little bit of that information, Rafi?
Well, let me just finish this one little thought first, though.
Okay.
But then when it starts to get into the middle, like Mr. X, right, and at the end, I started to hear I started to taste notes. Let's use sort of wine and whiskey tasting. I started to taste notes of like Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, and Howe, whose album is one of my favorite albums of all time. It's very esoteric, right? And I started to hear like, late 80s kind of U2, like Mothers of the Disappeared. I've mentioned that before on the podcast. Yeah. I started to hear more atmospheric stuff and more inventive stuff. That just wasn't there on the first couple of tracks. So I never really got beyond those tracks. And I really wish that someone would have told me and said, hey, Rafi, I'm going to lead you to the light. Listen to Victor, the entire album. And it does feature on one track, although I think he was just playing bass because I didn't hear his voice, Les Claypool of Primus. I'm a huge fan. It does. Yeah.
It does.
So that's my initial impression. You want to give us some personnel education here?
Yeah. All right. So there's a little bit to cover here. I'm going to try and intermix some of this with my thoughts. Okay. So just to start
Strap in, children.
I had never even attempted to listen to this album before Backtracking. Mm-hmm. I was just totally uninterested. Kind of unaware. I don't know. I'm not certain that I was aware that this album existed before we started talking about Backtracking. I probably did hear about it at some point from you or somebody, but I never really had any interest in listening to it. When I popped it in, I in some ways had a similar reaction to you. It took me on a similar journey, but probably in a more compressed period of time. It is such a punk, almost like hardcore, kind of 90s hardcore sounding album for the first 2 tracks. Yeah. Which
not a fan of that kind of music.
So, all right, the singer,
new metal almost.
I will say that the singer was one of the reasons I disliked those 2 tracks. He actually appears on, I think, 4 tracks on the album. The singer is a guy named Edwin. He was the lead singer of I, Mother Earth, a Canadian kind of grunge era band that we've talked about on the podcast before a little bit.
Okay.
He shared a producer with Rush, and it was the producer, I can't remember his name right now, but he only showed up on one album, the infamously badly produced album. What was it? Vapor Trails? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that producer, I am somehow or another, there was an I Mother Earth connection, either through the producer or whatever. Not surprising because they were a relatively popular Canadian band during this era. He is the singer on the first two tracks, and I will say I don't like the performance. I find it to be very hard. But what I thought when I heard those first 2 songs is like, listen, Alex is still coming off of what we now know was quite a little bit of resentment that he had towards Geddy about the entire synth era. And even going into Presto, right? We talked about this in those episodes where he and Geddy actually had some real tension around the recording of, I think, Vapor Trails or Roll the Bones. I can't remember which one, but they had a real disagreement around the continued inclusion of keyboards and Alex wanting it to be more of a guitar driven sound. So I kind of dismissed the first couple of tracks as Alex still has a lot of like rockin' guitar that has been building up over the entirety of the 80s that he just wants to get out.
It was unremarkable too. Like it wasn't the inventive Alex Lifeson that we hear in Rush. And I was like,
he's just going ham. I mean, it's like
it just felt uninspired. It felt uninspired. But as you wade deeper into the album, night and day.
Yeah. All right. So then we move deeper into the album, right? There is a singer on this album, a female singer,
Mm-hmm.
Del Bello, which is a kind of a stage name for a woman named something Del Bello, like Judy Del Bello or whatever. I looked her up as well. She was a fairly well-known Canadian singer in kind of the 70s, 80s. Ended up doing a whole bunch of studio work, but did have some pop songs, did some production, and
Not Judy Tenuta, is it?
no, no, it was something Dal. Anyway, so this Dalbella woman, she sings on one of the tracks, and I have to say, I found her voice to be absolutely annoying, incredibly kind of like a good, powerful voice, but a real like belter, you know. Oh, I got a feeling, you know. It was like a real like kind of.
Oh, I love Ethel Merman, so
it was almost an Ethel Merman kind of a sound to me. So I didn't like that.
Be great, kind of have the whole world on a plate. Anyway, sorry, I just can't help but break out into song when.
But by the time we get into like track 5, it definitely starts to become a much weirder, much more actually electronic and keyboard driven album than I would have ever expected out of Alex.
Yeah.
And also I felt like it was pretty unfocused. There are interesting points in the album, in my opinion. But there are some real like Serbs, I think, is the most interesting track on the album. Very interesting, a little bit hard, but kind of just an interesting instrumental. I like the instrumentals on the album better than I like the songs with vocals. I really think Shuttin' Up is the worst song on the album. It's really just total fodder.
It's very 90s. So you talk about it being very unfocused. I mean, if we can talk about the album art, I mean, the album art is a photo or an illustration. It's sort of like a photographic rendering, like a sketching of Alex Lifeson, and there's a lot of like abstract pieces that cover up, like his eye is like is covered up with like its own thing, and it's closed, and so it's kind of like, you know, one of those like bank robbery notes where they cut out the words from different magazines. It's kind of like that. And I wonder if it was intentional. It's that they kind of knew this was going to be sort of, you know, a mishmash of a sort of musical all sorts of Alex's head, and that it would be pretty unfocused and disjointed, and maybe that's why they chose this album art. Yeah.
Well, I think that is possible, Roth, and if they did do it, I do think it's disjointed. Now, if this was an album by the band and it were this disjointed, I would probably have much more of an issue with it. In some ways, it's reminiscent in that way of like Counterparts, which I think is kind of a slightly disjointed album. But I guess my overall takeaway here is that this really feels like kind of a pure solo album from somebody in an extremely big band. It is like totally a kind of a jerk off, goof off, just playing around with zero expectations of what he's going to get out of the album, with kind of like no commercial expectations probably. It's just like, hey, I'm going to fuck around. I'm going to put it out because I'm famous enough to put it out. But like, it doesn't feel to me like there was a ton of effort put into thinking about kind of what is the maybe let me take a step back. With bands, I think with really good bands, like they coalesce into a signature sound over the course of some period of time.
The alchemy.
But, alchemy. There's like, and they slowly synthesize their influences into something that generally for good bands is like a unique sound of their own that's somewhat consistent. Yeah. This album just really feels like that has never happened, which is clearly the case, right? He pulled together a bunch of random musicians. He noodled around a bunch in his home studio. He completed the songs. And when he had enough songs that were completed that would make up an album, he put them on an album and put it out. But there really doesn't feel like there was any kind of coalescence of like, what is the sound of this album? Which I think contrasts in a really interesting way to Geddy's solo album, which we'll talk about in a little while.
Are there rumors that Geddy and Alex are working on something post Rush?
I have heard things on the Reddit, But
Okay.
I
Well,
don't know
if they are and it does come out, we'll have to do that as an episode and just add
Yeah.
it to our list.
Yeah.
One of the things that we did discover as we went through all these Rush albums is, whether subtly or not so subtly, every Rush album has some theme to it, right? And there were themes that I didn't catch up on every one of the album's themes when I listened to them, but we started to notice some themes, especially as they keep moving, as they progress. We start seeing more of that. Maybe he intentionally just didn't want to do it. What I would actually, what I think would be really awesome is if we were to invite Alex and Geddy to come on this podcast to talk about their albums, but not talk about their own albums. I want Geddy to talk about Victor, and I want Alex to talk about
awkward. That would be
My
awkward.
Favorite Headache.
They're too nice, though. They're just going to say, "Oh, I think it's a really great album,"
No, we get them drunk first, though, on their beer.
Okay, that sounds like a good plan.
Yeah, no, Macallan 18.
So
We'll get Neil. We'll use Neil Peart's Macallan 18 to get them drunk.
I think, Ralph, I am ready to move on from this with two more comments.
Yeah, and I have one more comment after you.
So there is an unreleased track, Ralph, that was included on the version of the album that I listened to called Cherry Lopez Lullaby. I was like, who the fuck is Cherry Lopez? Cherry Lopez is a strain of marijuana. We know that Alex is an avid marijuana enthusiast. So that is one little bit of information for you. Second comment, and my last comment on this album, I'm going to turn it over to you after this, Ralph. There is a song on here that includes a drum break. It's like a 1-bar little drum solo drum break. Mm-hmm. And all I could think when I heard that was, why the fuck would Alex do that to some drummer? It is inevitable that every fucking Rush fan who worships Neil Peart is going to listen to this solo album and critique that drum break. There's just no winning. You know what I mean? There's just no way to win.
I don't know, because I felt the same way, and we'll discuss it when we get to My Favorite Headache. When I first listened to that album, which I did give a lot more time and attention when it came out, I felt I felt going in that I was going to be much more critical about the drumming and the guitar playing.
Yeah.
Just as I was critical of the bass and the drum playing here, but at the same time, they're making something that is entirely their own. And what I find very interesting about listening to both these solo albums is sort of parsing out what sounds Rush-ish in the original albums that they do, the solo albums, and what doesn't, because there's a lot. I would say more of it sounded less like Rush than My Favorite Headache. Obviously, with Geddy singing My Favorite Headache, that alone makes it sound like a third of Rush. But I felt that this was a much more unique album. Like it was further away from Rush than My Favorite Headache felt. And I kind of appreciated that. But I would say my sort of parting thought for this album is give it a real listen. It's worth lying down in your bed or a chair and putting headphones on, listening from start to finish. It is a worthwhile album. You're going to be led down a lot of paths that are, cul-de-sacs or dead ends, but it's going to be well worth it, I think. Yeah.
I think that this album is worthwhile if you are a Rush completist. Right. If you're somebody who's so deep into Rush that you really want to listen to everything associated with the band at least once, if you want to really do your own complete backtracking of the band, then obviously you have to listen to this.
Yeah.
But I'm going to take a slightly different angle than Roth on this. I'm going to say this is a skippable album. There's some interesting shit in here. It's kind of fun to hear what Alex was interested in during this period of time in the band's career. But overall, I think it's a pretty it's a missable album.
Yeah, and I think they recently released it on vinyl. I remember seeing on Instagram.
I did see that.
Yeah, I remember it was pretty recent. I remember seeing something. I remember seeing Alex Lifeson and Victor and something about a new release. So, given the ephemeral nature of social media, it's not like I can just go find it, right? It sort of comes and it goes. So,
well, all right. So, Victor, I think we're a little bit mixed on. So, Roth, are we ready to move on to different stages? The 1998 triple album, I believe. Triple album. Roth, this is a triple album. This is 3 discs of Rush music. Are you ready to fucking give it a listen?
Why I Am. In fact, wait, hang on. Before we go there, okay, here it is. The Real Lurks, July 20th, posted Victor, originally released on January 9th, 1996, is available on vinyl for the first time.
Yeah.
The solo debut had Lifeson take on the roles of songwriter, producer, and mixer, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah.
So it's 4 sides: side A,
Yeah.
side B, side C, side D. And what was very interesting is that Alex posted this to his Instagram, but he's talking about himself in the third person, which I never thought Alex would do.
I suspect someone else posted that for Alex.
I mean, think about it. Read this so this is Alex Lifeson posting. As a Rush backstage exclusive, Alex Lifeson will personally autograph 1,000 lithographs. So he's referring to himself as Alex Lifeson.
Yeah,
no, I don't know.
Roth,
I don't know.
You know what? I'm going to say 2 things. 1, he didn't post that himself. 2, nobody needs a 4-disc extended vinyl of this. Save your money.
It's red though, and I would like to invite Alex Lifeson to come on this podcast and do the interview entirely in the third person.
Roth, enough invitations. I want to listen to different stages. This is a fucking banger. Get it on.
It's got a roadmap that you took, radar from some stars. All along the highway, she's got a crystal compass, jump under the rivers, under the Sahara. They travel in the time of the prophet, on a desert highway straight to the heart of the sun. Like lovers and heroes, I'm the best part of everyone.
Oh my God, Roth. It's like being there listening to a live album.
It is. It's really, really well recorded. And as we've discussed in previous Rush albums, there were some that were too studio sounding, like their first one, All the World's a Stage. It wasn't All the World's a Stage. There was one that was a little too was it?
Yeah, we were saying Show Don't Tell is very, very, it almost sounds like the studio recordings. And then we said,
but I know the band had a conscious conversation about it, and they intentionally wanted to bring more of the crowd and the room sound into it, and then they sort of over-indexed on a couple of them, and then they've always sort of played around, and their live albums do each have a very distinct and unique personality. Yeah. I think this is arguably one of the best sort of blends of studio, like where you can hear the music, you can hear all the nuance in the music, but you can also feel the energy of the room.
Yeah, so it's interesting, Ralph. I want to cover a couple of basics. It's interesting you bring that up. So just to refresh everyone's memories, the live albums that have been released in the catalog up to this point is first live album, All the World's a Stage, released in the late 70s. Don't remember the year right now. Exit Stage Left kind of was the capper album at the end of the prog era. And then Show of Hands, capper album at the end of the synth era. This is the next live album. There's a couple of things that I think we need to discuss just for context before we dig into this. This album was primarily recorded on 2 different, very different tours, right? The 1997 Test for Echo tour, the show in Chicago, outside of Chicago, the World Theater. That was the majority of the songs that were on discs 1 and 2. The only exceptions is there are 3 songs. The songs are Bravado, Show Don't Tell, and Analog Kid that were taken from the 1994 Counterparts tour. And then the third disc, Ralph, is from the Farewell to Kings tour. It is just a 1978 concert tour disc. So this is really, I would call this a double live CD of 1998 contemporary Rush live performances, and then a 1978, which is more of like, Exit Stage Left era, that third disc.
And you know what would be a great name for this album is because they have a whole bunch of different stages on which they played.
Yeah.
Different stages. Get it?
Yeah, I got it.
Get it?
All right, so Rob,
you pick up on that.
With that context, I will say I almost want to tackle this as 2 different albums because really there's the 90s tour, the 90s tour discs 1 and 2, and then the late 70s disc 3. But I will say across both of them, I would agree with what you said up front. I think that the production of this live album is really great. It is kind of a perfect mix of clean kind of stage feed, like, sound and a little bit of crowd noise. It's a little bit rough around the edges, feels a little bit, live. There's some improvisation and stuff that they do in it that just makes it feel a little bit organic. But it isn't, a kind of a super garagey live recording. So I really did like that. I think it's a nice happy medium.
Yeah.
All right, so let me go through the track list and we can start the discussion. Okay, so here are the tracks from the kind of 90s concerts: Dreamline, Limelight, Driven, Bravado, Animate, Show Don't Tell, The Trees, Nobody's Hero, Closer to the Heart, 2112, Test for Echo, Analog Kid, Free Will, Roll the Bones, Stick It Out, Resist, Leave That Thing Alone, which leads into the drum solo, The Rhythm Method, Natural Science, and Force 10. And then we get to track, Natural Science, Force 10. Where was I? Spirit of the Radio, Tom Sawyer, YYZ. That ends the 90s section, okay? Mm-hmm. The 70s section begins with Bastille Day. So it goes Bastille Day, By Turn the Snow Dogs, Xanadu, A Farewell to Kings, Cygnus X1 Book 1, and Cygnus X1 Book 2, Roth Hemispheres.
Yeah.
The entirety of Hemispheres. Anthem, Working Man, Fly By Night, and Cinderella Man.
I think it's important. I think it really is important to note. This is basically a live album of like every like hardcore Rush fans like wet dream. Like to hear 2112 played in its entirety, to hear Hemispheres played in its entirety. I mean, the only thing that can make it even like more of a wet dream, not to bring that up again, but is if they played like the Necromancer and Fountain of Lamneth in its entirety.
I completely agree, Raf. I think one of the first things you've got to comment on this album is it is worth keeping in rotation simply because the entirety of 2112 is played on here.
And Natural Science.
The entirety of Cygnus.
Yeah, and Natural Science. I mean, like these are songs that are, do they play Jacob's Ladder on this?
They don't. There are some songs that they kind of leave out in here that are some personal favorites.
And they play those regularly though, so those aren't ones that you typically.
And actually,
don't hear.
Natural Science appears on a couple other live albums as well. But like Hemispheres live is fucking amazing. This version of 2112, I think, is just fucking amazing. I have some questions and comments about it, but like overall, I think this is just a stellar live album, and I love the fact that there's like a 90s set and there's a 70s set.
No, I'll go ahead. Sorry.
And the 70s set, I think, is just fucking. It is flawless with the exception of the inclusion of Cinderella Man as a closer. I mean, who wants to hear Cinderella Man live at all? And who wants to hear them close the set with Cinderella Man? That is that's a fail, right?
Yeah. Well, you know what? And I'm going to sort of go off on a slight tangent here, but it is related to this album because the second track off of the first disc is Limelight. Yeah. And yesterday I was listening to the Smartless podcast with Howard Stern was the guest. Yeah. And he was talking about, how he wished he played music and he wanted to learn guitar so he could speak the language. Yeah. He was clearly throughout the course of the podcast, he was constantly like going back to like Sean Hayes about his piano playing. Like he clearly is in this stage in his life where he is making up for lost time, and music is one of those things. And he was talking about, like all of them were talking about, I'm going to bring up Led Zeppelin again. He was talking about how he learned the intro to Thank You, the Led Zeppelin song. And they were just like, he's like, I can't believe someone wrote that. Like, that's amazing. And Jason Bateman was like, yeah, it's fantastic. And I was like, I don't recall that song. So I went and listened to it. I know the song now that I heard it. And I was like listening to the intro and I'm like, okay, that's like him noodling on a guitar. Like, and I realized like what I thought in my back of my head is like, if you want to hear like true guitar alchemy, like listen to the guitar solo of Limelight. Like that to me is mind blowing. And I realized like that non-musicians, I think, hear music in a very different way than those who are more trained in music, not to sound snobby about it. Because seriously, I listened to that and I'm like, okay. I mean, it's nice, but it's not like
Rough. Now
amazing.
that is not the kind of attitude that folks on Reddit would appreciate. They would say that this is subjective and everyone has their own opinion. And just because you happen to be a fucking great musician doesn't mean that you can take away Howard Stern's love for the intro to Thank You.
I'm not poo-pooing his love for it, but I was just like,
you and Howard
to
should
me,
cut
it was
heads.
like, to me, it was just, and then they asked him who his favorite guitarists are, and he was, well, of course, Jimmy Page, Jimi Hendrix, and like
All the Jimmys. Jimmy Page.
well, yeah, I mean, I feel like the musicians I know, like the true guitarist musicians, while they appreciate Led Zeppelin and Jimi Hendrix, like if you were to ask them like who like blows your mind, they would be more like James Brown than Jimi Hendrix, right? They're going to go to something that is I think just requires a little bit more complexity to pull off. I don't know. Because complexity doesn't. I'm gonna get lambasted for this, but anyways.
Ralph.
The point is,
what? That's a shitty take right there. Why don't you just let me throw you a line right now before you dig yourself deeper? And I'm gonna. Speaking of line, you want to know what line I'm gonna throw you? I'm gonna throw you a dream line, Ralph. Because
I thought you were gonna give me a line of cocaine.
Limelight. No question. The opening of that song, it is such a great set opener for Rush, right? Like they play the intro and then you hear like it's just awesome, right? It's what you want to hear going. But like Dreamline is not a song that I love on the album. But I will say I fucking loved it as an opener on this live album. I thought it sounded great live. The energy was really good. So this is an example of a song that for me works way better live within this spot in the set list than it does like on the actual album.
Yeah, and you know what? There was an album. I think it was one of the ones that we're going to be talking about here. I mean, Grace Under Pressure live was recorded, not in 2009. But they open up with Distant. No, what did they open up with on the live album?
I will tell you what they open up with.
Because there was one where I was like, yeah, that's not a good opener.
Spirit of the Radio.
No, Spirit of the Radio is a good opener. And when we get to it, it wasn't Russian Rio.
Yeah. Well, we'll hit it when we get to it. But I would just say that I don't love Dreamline as a song. It is not a song that, like, if I were buying a ticket to go see Rush, I would hope that they would play. That said, when it came on at the beginning of this live album, I just think it worked much better than I expected. They go into Limelight, which is like a great second song. The energy is super high. I don't love the driven bravado anime show don't tell section all that much, but I think that's just because I don't know. I understand why they did it here. That's like the contemporary music from the tour that they were on, but like those are, I think, mostly kind of forgettable songs at this point. I don't know what you think about that.
I just keep gravitating towards, imagine like they close out Closer to the Heart and you're already like riding high from that, and then they go into the intro to 2112, because every Rush show, like a little game Rush fans play is like, are they going to play all of 2112? Are they going to play all of, like you wonder if they're going to do the whole thing. And they didn't for the longest time.
Well, all right. So before we get to 2112, I will say they play the Trees, which obviously I think the Trees gets played almost always in Rush sets, right? Then they go into Nobody's Hero, which I have to say, I'm going to say another song, contemporary song to Nobody's Hero, Dreamline, works much better live than it did on the record, in my opinion. Nobody's Hero, I think, works even less well live than on the album. I think it came across to me as even more kind of cringy. They sandwiched it between the Trees and Closer to the Heart. So this is kind of like the slow dance section of the set, you know what I mean? Where it's like they take it down a notch. But like, I gotta say, I did not like that song's inclusion at all. But then they go into 2112. The version of 2112 is just fucking amazing. I also think Discovery, the movement Discovery in here, is much longer than on the studio album. There's like a little bit of a Lurks kind of guitar solo almost at the beginning. It's really fun. I mean, it's awesome.
Yeah, he's riffing on that. Remember that discovery section was in the book, the Ready Player One.
Yeah, that's right. You did mention that. So anyway, 2112. I think that this version of the complete 2112 is a must-have in anyone's Rush catalog. I love it. The only criticism is not even really a criticism, but I will say that you start to hear in this version of 2112 that Ged is having a difficult time hitting some of the highest stuff here. He's lost a bit of that like super high scream where he doesn't switch over into falsetto. He just like pushes through it and it becomes really screechy. It's understandable that he's lost it at this point. I mean, he's, I don't know, he's in his 50s anyway at this point when this is recorded. So I'm not criticizing it, and I think he navigates around it. He still will hit those notes every now and again at kind of choice moments, but a lot of times...
Yeah, but he's making new vocal lines that he reuses. We've taken care of everything. The words you read, the songs you sing.
It's almost like he's singing the lower harmony to what he originally sang on the album, you know? But still, I don't think it takes away from the recording of the song at all. The energy is great. I actually think the feel and groove and tempo of the song is really, really great. And I want to come back to tempo when we get to the third disc, but I will say that like the groove and tempo of the band on this album is really good but interesting when you compare it to disc 3.
And especially when you compare it to Rush and Rio.
Yeah, so like let's go to disc 2 for a second. I'm going to say that I just my opinion on disc 2 is it's a throwaway. I don't like the set list, particularly on disc 2, right?
Let's be a little kinder. It's the middle child.
It is the middle child, but I mean, there are some highlights on it. Natural Science, Force 10, obviously Spirit of the Radio, Tom Sawyer, YYZ is like interesting, but like across I have never been a fan of Free Will. I know that is a very popular song for many Rush fans, but like Test for Echo, Analog Kid, Free Will, Roll the Bones, which should never appear anywhere in recorded media, in my opinion. Stick It Out, Resist.
Jack, get back. Come on, get busy with the facts.
The drum solo again. We've heard Neil drum solos on so many live albums. I just don't think people need to hear more Neil drum solos, honestly.
I beg to differ, but
you like to hear the drum. Do you really like to hear sidebar?
You're the drummer too. Come on.
I know. Like, listen, I love to listen to them. Like when they appeared on fucking Exit Stage Left, and
you know what I would love to hear is I'd love to hear just an album of his drum solos in chronological order, spliced together, because he picks up where he left off with previous drum solos. So there's certain themes in previous drum solos that he incorporates as a jumping off point for the next set of solos, and I would love to hear it in chronological order.
Listen, there is no question that he does amazing drum solos. The question is more whether a drum solo has any place on a live album for a band. And I'm going to say no, mostly no.
And I'm going to say yes.
Okay, well, we can disagree on that, and I'll be right and you'll be wrong, but that's the way it'll work.
Did I mention Led Zeppelin yet?
Disc 3. We've got to go back to disc 3.
Yeah.
I will say that when you listen to disc 3 compared to disc 1, the first thing that I felt like was, God damn, on disc 3, it almost sounds like the band is rushing, like they're really playing fast.
Full of piss and vinegar. Yeah.
And on disc 1, I mean, they have I would say that probably if you were to compare the kind of beats per minute of a song on here compared to the original recording, it probably is a little bit slower, but I don't mind it. It feels a little bit groovier on most of the songs. A little bit slower, but not in a bad way. But kind of back to back, you really do hear the difference in the way the band was playing.
Well, and I do wonder, because as I mentioned on an album we're going to talk about later, it's really sluggish, and I was curious. Yeah. Because they're known for using triggers, and those triggers are typically set to a BPM, right? I'm assuming they are, right? So So I wonder if they intentionally, like some of these times, are they intentionally fast or slow because someone counted it in too fast or slow, or they're, it was by design.
You think they're playing to a click live?
I think some of the triggers have to be. I mean, like especially during like power windows and hold your fire, they have to be.
I mean, they definitely. It sounds like they're playing to a click on a show of hands for sure.
Yeah, I mean, they can trigger something, right? But once it's triggered, if it goes on for any period of time and it has to be in tempo, it has to be in tempo.
Yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting question, but there is no doubt, right? I'm not hallucinating. I mean, like the 90s and later live recordings are much slower than any of the kind of pre 1980s stuff. I mean, it is like substantial. Okay, so Rob.
Yeah.
What else? I guess that's it for me.
No, I
will say that the last thing I would say is I really like the concept of this album.
That's what I was getting at. Yeah.
Different stages. Yeah. But I think I probably would have appreciated this one a little bit more if they kind of did like if they did a progression and it was disc 1 was the 70s, disc 2 was maybe the late 80s or sometime in the 80s, and then disc 3 was the 90s. And I'm not saying that I like the fact that they mixed up songs that were written in that era. So I'm not saying that they should have only done 70s songs in the 70s live section. I like that there's like a 1990s version of 2112 in here, but I think I would have liked more chronology in the way the discs were laid out. And really, that isn't kind of what happened. It's kind of 1 and 2 that's a grab bag, and then disc 3, which is separate.
What I would have loved to hear is like the 78 recording, like hear them play stuff from like Power Windows that like I would love to have heard them in 1978 playing, Time Stand Still or something from Test for Echo, but that was just physically not possible, given the space-time continuum, but that would have been awesome if they could do that.
Yeah. And Roth, the cover, I'm going to give a shout out to this cover. I really like this cover. Simple, beautiful, a really good cover that is going to contrast markedly to the cover of Rush and Rio, which we're going to have to discuss.
Oh God!
But we'll leave that off for a few minutes. Anything else?
I think they also called Rush and Rio like Middle Age Crisis. No, I mean I think that's about it.
Okay.
But to a point I made on a couple episodes ago, I think through the power of AI. Someone could probably take the way Rush sounded in like 1978 and take like Time Stand Still and have it rendered like Rush in 1978. That would be really awesome. That would be freaking awesome.
That would be.
Come on, AI, do some good in the world.
We have a brave future in front of us with AI and computers. Okay.
Like imagine if you take their last song, The Garden, and do it in the style of their first album with like Rutsy drumming.
Roth, you keep on mentioning The Garden. I've never heard The Garden. I'm gonna hear it.
I mean, it's not the most Rush song.
Recording this fucking episode.
Next album, since I'm the bass player, 2000, Mr. Geddy Lee, Gary Weinrib, aka Geddy Weinrib, came out with his first solo album and only solo album to date, called My Favorite Headache. Now, it's worth mentioning that 2 of the tracks that were recorded for this were not released until he came out with his book, My Effin' Life. Which, do we want to include those?
No, because I haven't heard them.
Okay, we won't. So just remember the 2 tracks that were released with My Effin' Life, or is it 3? But anyways, the 2 tracks that were recorded or released.
If you want to cover them, Roth, you can cover them. I'm not going to feel offended.
No, I mean it's not. If we cover this, it's going to cover that, so we'll be fine. It's under something called the Lost Demos. It's Gone and I Am You. Excuse me. Were released in 2023. So if you want to listen to those 2, it's off of something called the Lost Demos by Geddy Lee.
Roth, can we just fucking enough with the bullshit? Can we fucking get into some jams here?
Yeah, it's My Favorite Headache. Let's listen to a little sample of it.
my favorite headache.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I want you to take the reins. I want you to drive us to the North Pole of criticism and give us the Christmas present of your wisdom. Let's go.
Okay, so what I remember of this album is I did get it when it came out, and I remember it being like late autumn, early winter when I listened to it.
Yeah.
I listened to it a lot when I was visiting family on the East Coast.
Driving to Syracuse?
No, not driving. This was when my family mostly lived in Northern Virginia. So like we had nephews then, niece. So no, I would have had a nephew by this point in time. He would have been a baby. He would have been like 6.
Driving there. Were you living in?
No, I wasn't driving there. But when I was there, we would drive from place to place, and I would listen to this album. So it reminds me of that trip. Yeah, that's what I sort of reminded of. And keep in mind, like we had not heard anything from Rush.
Yeah.
In years, and this was the first time, and this is kind of what brought me back to them, right? Really? I heard that Geddy Lee came out with this album. Victor didn't do it. I sort of passed over that, but with this one I was like, okay, and I started listening to it, and I was very critical. I was going into it sort of like a sourpuss, like how can you do this, without Geddy, without Alex and Neil. And after listening to it I've listened to this in its entirety several times, and it is very cohesive sonically. And it's the lyric writing is actually surprisingly strong for it being Geddy, right? You don't have Neil Peart.
Well, I mean, you are comparing it to like 1976 when he was last writing lyrics for the band, and he was 21, right?
Yeah, but there were a lot of really great melodies in this. I mean, and it's interesting because it would be very easy to say, oh, it sounds like Rush because it's Geddy Lee singing. And it does, in that it's Geddy Lee singing, but it is uniquely a solo album, just like Victor is uniquely a solo album. So I actually really like this album. Like as a standalone album, it's something that I will still listen to occasionally. And a lot of the melodies, like Window to the World, has some great songwriting, great vocal lines. So it's a very, very good album. Now they have the drums and the rhythm section are much more rudimentary than what you come to expect from Rush, as is the guitar. So it's a little bit more straightforward. But I think that the way, I think that was probably Geddy's intention. It's like, look, it's about the songwriting. It's about the singing. It's not about the band so much. I think he settled into a decent alchemy, not anything that is on the level of Rush, but I think it works, and he has some really talented, really great musicians playing along with him on this. Yeah,
I think that's a really good overall description of the album. Going into this album, I had never heard this album at all. Never heard it at all. Just
and it did come out November 14th, 2000, so it was in the fall.
Yeah, good on you, Roth. You remembered. So I never heard this album before. I will say that going into it, I kind of had in my head that I was probably making up a story in my head that just didn't exist. I talked about it when we talked about Alex Lifeson's live album, how I felt like part of what I would expect to hear on that album was him exercising this desire for a guitar-driven music that he wasn't getting in Rush during kind of that period of conflict at the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s. And so I expected that his desire to do a solo album would be driven at least partially by that. And so I expected what I'd hear on the album was partially that. Similarly, I expected the opposite from Geddy, right? I expected it to be a much more poppy synthy album, given that they had kind of parted, it seemed like Geddy was way more into keyboards and stuff in the 80s and early 90s than Alex was. And so I kind of expected he would go back to more of a keyboard driven poppier record while he was doing much harder stuff with Rush. But that isn't the case at all. It's actually the sound of this album, at least in my analysis, is pretty similar to the sound of what the band was making at the same time. You know, the musicianship obviously is different.
Do you know who played on this? Do you know who the drummer was?
No.
You mentioned that Neil Peart sounded a little like him.
Oh, yeah, Matt Cameron. Matt Cameron
played drums.
You know what? I didn't even notice that.
And you know who played guitar, or who are the guitarists, and he did a bunch of other stuff in production? Ben Mink, who is known for playing violins on Losing It. So was, I mean, so Geddy and Ben has been a long time friend of the band, right? Probably from the very beginning. So it was a bit of a family affair. It wasn't like he just went out there and got some professional musicians randomly to play with him. These are people that he has a proven, like I said, alchemy and chemistry with, playing in Rush and collaborating with them all throughout these years. So it was very, I think that when I learned that, it sort of gave me a little bit more perspective and brought me a little closer to it, right? It seemed like something that was still within sort of the umbrella of Rushdom in the truest sense, because of the people who's collaborating with. So I thought that was really sort of heartwarming in a way, who the people were he collaborated with. And not to say that it wasn't the same thing on Victor. I just don't know the stories of the personnel behind Victor as well as these guys.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me overall, what I would say is this album feels to me like it is better produced than, I'm going to compare it to Alex's album a lot. I think that's probably natural. It might not be fair, but it's the way that I thought about it primarily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think this is a much better produced album. And I don't just mean better sounding album. I just think the cohesion, the culling, the collection of the songs that's on it feels a little less like a random grab bag of experiments that somebody was noodling on at home, and more like, I want this to sound like a kind of a cohesive whole.
Well, let's look at the context too. I mean, Alex's album came out in between two Rush albums, so he had a lot musically going on in his life.
Yeah.
Geddy did it during this band's hiatus.
That's right.
And I think that tragedy that Neil was dealing with, and that their friend was on the road and dealing with these things. I think Neil might have been back from his long trip by this time, but I think that probably gave them a different perspective on what it means to be a musician in a band. So I think that, like, in that sense, this is kind of the first like Rush related album of that sort of final era. Like you could call this in a way a prototypical Rush album. Maybe
it is. I mean, I actually that was kind of the next thing that I was gonna. It's not exactly the next thing I was gonna say, but it's similar. I think that this is a better produced, more cohesive album. It has an overall sound and feel, and it sounds to me like generic Rush. It's not quite, it doesn't have it, for like obvious reasons. And I think this is like an appreciation of Rush fundamentally. It doesn't, it's missing some certain magic that I think comes from the combination of those three unique players that I miss, but it is very Rush-like. I mean, you could easily mistake one or two of these songs. Like, these songs could make it onto a Rush album if they were performed by Neil and Alex. I think obviously it would be Rush. Maybe that's a dumb thing to say, but like it really feels much more like Rush than Alex's album. Alex's album does not feel at all like Rush to me.
Yeah. And you know what? I'm looking through the track listing, and immediately I can recall the songs and what is memorable about them, which is not an easy feat to pull off, especially when you are someone as high profile and noticeable for being in Rush as Geddy Lee. You know, I've spent a lot more time with this album than I have with Victor, and I plan on spending some more time with Victor, knowing now what I know about it. But I'm looking at which songs would be the most Rush on this. Yeah. And I keep thinking Working At Perfect would probably, to me, be the most Rush song. It's kind of like, it's in my head, it sort of inspires sort of like the steampunk-ishness of Clockwork Angels. So I kind of see Working At Perfect being later era Rush. Otherwise, like probably mid-era Rush, I would say like Grace to Grace is the one I would pick. So I think Working at Perfect and Grace to Grace, to me, seem the most natural sort of candidates to be Rush proper songs.
Yeah. Listen, I think we're pretty well lined up here. I think that if you're a Rush fan and you really just want more Rush-like material, this is the album to go to. If you just want to be a completist, listen to Alex's album, but it doesn't really deliver anything similar to Rush, at least in my opinion.
I do agree. And you know what, Geddy Lee, if you had any doubt that he was Canadian, just hear the way he says the word elegant story of what could have been, he says in Grace to Grace. So if you want to hear Geddy in his full Canadian pride, listen to this album.
Ralph, I'm done talking about Geddy's beans. I want to talk about Rush in Rio, Ralph. Rush in Rio. Controversial live album released
Tell us about
in 2003. I'm not going to tell you about it. I'm going to let you listen right now to make your own judgment. Let's get it on.
Okay, so this album, let's start with the album art, right? It's
Obrigado.
It's a Drau. It's a pterodactyl wearing sort of what was her name? Charo, kind of like
it's a dragon, Rafi. It's not a pterodactyl.
It's a dragon? Oh, it looks like a pterodactyl. A dragon. And he's got a coconut like cocktail, some beads. He's drunk, clearly.
Yeah, Rafi, here's the real question about this cover. What the fuck? That's the question. This is a cover
I think this is the pendulum swinging too far from.
This is a cover that is so bad that it has no merit at all. It has negative merit. I don't think I can say that about any of the covers.
Okay, well, look again. We're all about context.
To this point.
The previous album was Vapor Trails.
Yeah,
it was The Return. It was a very dark album. Right. Yeah. It was very dark sonically, not just, thematically, but sonically as well. And the band knew that it was going to be several years before they have another studio album out in Snakes and Arrows. And I think they're like, they're coming off this high of, okay, we just made it through a really trying period. Neil's got a new wife. He's got a new life, and like, let's have some fun, guys. Right?
Yeah.
Let's be crazy guys. What if we go to Rio and do a show? We've never done that before. Everyone's done it. Maiden did it. By the way, Bruce Dickinson never reached out to us to co-host this episode. Sorry to say. Neither did Ray Daniels. Anyways, they can, we'll find some other pocket. Anyways, so I think that they decided to just like have fun.
But Roth, there's more backstory to the Rio thing.
Or this is what happens when you let Alex Lifeson take over the duties of art direction instead of Neil Peart. That's my story.
I don't. Is that really what happened? No,
I don't know, but it would be hilarious if that's.
You just said a whole bunch of things, Roth, that are definitely words and sentences. I will tell you that this is a cover that has zero merit. It has negative merit. It is one of the worst album covers I've ever seen in my life. Actually, I think it's horrible. The only thing I can't figure out is this a photo? Is the dragon a projection that was going on the screen behind them when they were playing live that they just cleaned up a bit for use on the cover? Because if you look at the bottom of the cover image, you do see the band on a stage and you see a crowd, and it's in front of the dragon. So the only thing I can think is so either they created this image and put it behind the band and the crowd in an effort to make it look like it was part of a rear projection, or it actually was a rear projection. They just cleaned it up. And for some reason they thought we would want to see this dragon. But regardless of what got us to where we are on the cover, it it is a bad destination. This is not
Well,
where we want to be.
Well, I think I might be more right than I care to hope, because most live albums that Rush has done were always produced by either the band together or by Geddy.
Yeah.
This one, guess who the only band member who's a named producer on the album is?
Alex
Lifeson.
Yeah.
And a guy named Jimbo.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I don't know. And I don't know. It would be interesting to talk to Hugh Syme and see what he has to say about this if he was not involved with it. Unfortunately, I was not able to find any information on whether he was involved in this cover. But I will say that this cover is a black eye on Rush's catalog of what I think are by and large very good album covers. I'm not a fan. Now, to go back to the Rio thing, yeah, I think that there is like Brazil is an infamously passionate hard rock audience, right? You'll get bands like Maiden who go down there and play to, 50, 60, 70, 80,000 people, and they do it pretty regularly, right? A lot of those kind of hard rock bands will tour down there. Rush had never toured in Rio, but Tom Sawyer was used as the theme song for a TV show in Brazil in like the 80s or 90s. That was a very, very famous TV show, incredibly famous. And the band heard about this, but they had never toured there. And then they were kind of like, fuck it, we're going to go down and tour in Brazil. and they were like completely kind of like blown away by how passionate and how well known all of their songs were by the Brazilian fans. Obviously, Tom Sawyer was, one that they knew really, really well from this TV show connection, but they knew a bunch of the other songs also. So I do think that, Raf, you are right that they're getting into a little bit more of a place where it's like, fuck it, we've accomplished all we need to accomplish. Let's do some things that are kind of fun. And this Rio trip was part of that. But
yeah, and I did look it up, and Hugh Syme created the Dragon.
No.
Yep.
That's a shame. That's a Hugh Syme crime, Raf. That's a Hugh Syme crime. So in Rio, there were two shows they played. The show that was recorded was in Rio. It was 40,000 people in attendance. It was the smaller of the shows they played. The Sao Paulo show was 60,000 fans apparently.
Mm-hmm.
So huge crowds. Let's get into the substance. I'm going to go through the track list real quick. But I think we can kind of cover the sound of this album overall. They open with Tom Sawyer, then Distant Early Warning, New World Man, Roll the Bones, Earthshine, YYZ, The Pass, Bravado, Big Money, The Trees, Free Will, Closer to the Heart, Natural Science, One Little Victory, Driven, Ghost Rider, Secret Touch, Dreamline, Red Sector A, Leave That Thing Alone, O Baterista, which is the drum solo. Resist, 2112, Limelight, Spirit of the Radio, By Tour, Cygnus X1 Book 1, Working Man, Between Sun and Moon, and Vital Signs.
So by the way, the license plate, the first choice I got was, I don't know if it's available, but I will be getting it in the mail, is Cygnu X1 without the S. Just because that's all the characters I had.
That's a great license plate, Raf. It is not as great as if you had done Singus, but it is great.
And I got to say that as you're reading through the track listing and I was looking at the album art, it does have a kind of a grape Kool-Aid kind of vibe. And I can taste grape in my mouth when I'm looking at the album cover.
Yeah. Okay.
There's fruit and it's grape Kool-Aid color. I mean, it's
all right.
Anyway.
So Raf, I want to talk about this track list a little bit.
Yeah.
Maybe
long.
why don't we actually let's talk about the sound of the album overall. So this is, I think, an extraordinarily live sounding. This album sounds too live in my opinion.
And I would say live being equated with like kind of crappy.
Yeah, and it isn't really just the recording quality, although I do quibble with the recording quality in certain spots. I think there's just too much crowd noise. It's just too live a sounding an album, I think. But yeah, crappy. I think one thing that I have to call out is there are some really rough Geddy vocal moments on this album. Like bad. moments that I was surprised they actually included in the.
Well, and to give a little bit of perspective too, they were going to Brazil, and they rented an audio truck, right, to record a mobile recording truck to record the show. And when they arrived there, it was they learned that it was much more rudimentary and primitive than they had anticipated. So they kind of had to like make do with what they had. And that's why it does have kind of this sound to it that is a little less polished than what you would expect for a 2003 live album from one of the greatest rock bands in history at the time.
Yeah, it's kind of a bummer. I have to be honest; it's just kind of a bummer sound to it. So,
but I would say the bigger issue I have with it is not the sound. It's like, I mean, Tom Sawyer. They open up with it in the first three, like they're very slow and sluggish. They're just very sluggish. Maybe it's the heat, maybe it's the booze, maybe it's a little bit of both. Throw a little age in there, but it was very like anticlimactic to hear Tom Sawyer played so slow, and they had to have known it. I mean, come on, like they could not have, they couldn't have overseen that.
I've got to imagine. I mean, all right. So there are a few things that we could kind of talk about around this, but we already talked about it in different stages, right? That the kind of 90s 2000s Rush is playing noticeably slower than the 70s 80s Rush. One thing we could discuss, obviously, there's the age thing, which I wouldn't be surprised about. A second thing is Neil has by this point, gone through those Freddie Gruber drum lessons, and his style of playing, I do think the feel of Neil's playing has changed. You can really hear it on the studio albums. And I would argue that his time and his drive, like he is less metronomic and he is less driving. He's less ahead of the beat. And when I say ahead of the beat, I mean a little bit, like he's pushing the band forward. And I think that really is a hallmark of the way he plays through the 70s and I would say like early 80s. He starts this in kind of that Freddie Gruber era, grunge era. He starts to play a little bit with a little bit more groove, a little bit more fluctuation in tempo. I generally like his playing a lot better after that, I've discovered. And so I think maybe you could attribute some of it to Neil and just the way he plays at this point in his career. I don't know. Are you buying any of that, Raf? Or do you think this is just a straight up fuck up? I mean, but it's noticeable. And on this album, I think you can say on different stages, it's just kind of an interesting thing to think about and to compare and contrast. On this one, I think it's objectively not good. It just sounds weird.
No, I agree with all that, mainly because I hadn't thought about it, and you're right. I can't fucking believe I just said that, but I do agree with that assessment. This band is coming out of a pretty distinct period. And as I've said earlier, after Test for Echo, everything they've done since was because they wanted to, right? They weren't doing it because they felt any obligation. They didn't do it because they had to deliver for their fans necessarily. They did it because they wanted to do it, and they were experimenting a little bit more at this time. So I think this is why they were probably a little more lax and willing to accept subpar recording and subpar recording experience, because to them it was less about the sound and the performance, and it was more about the story of going to this new place and pushing boundaries. And if you read on Rush's website, there's a really great anecdote written by Neil Peart about their travels down to Brazil to play this show. So I think that the most important takeaway from this album is not so much the performances or the sonic quality of it. It's the story of what brought them there, and showing the reach of the band and sort of the universality of Rush. I would agree with that. All right, so Raf, track list. A couple of comments I want to just make on the track list, on the set list, I guess here. Mm-hmm. Number one for me, The Pass. I fucking love that they included The Pass in this set list. Like, what a great song. Again, it's one of these songs that I kind of have forgotten about over the years. And when we backtracked it on the album, I was like, oh God, that really is a great song. And then hearing it live, I'm like,
fuck, it's really great live. Such a good song that's easy to kind of overlook in their catalog.
Yeah, I agree. And this is where they start doing Resist live as guitar, just Geddy and Alex. So
Yes.
if you recall on different stages when they do Resist, it's the full band. But when you hear it on this album, it's just Geddy and Alex. And I actually like it better just acoustic. I mean, first of all, Neil gets to go, have a Macallan 18. I mean, he's got expensive tastes. While Geddy and Alex can just get up there and play in a intimately intimate song. Yeah, I kind of dig it. I like the way it breaks up the set a little bit.
Yeah, no, it's nice. But on the other hand, why they play Roll the Bones? Roll the Bones appears on multiple of these live albums, and I just really I've brought it up so many times. I actually say, like, I was fucking listening to this album in my living room on the speakers, like big speaker system, and my wife walked through, and they were like, it was in the middle of Roll the Bones, right? And it's the musical part, and then it starts into the rap part. She just looks at me, she goes, "What the fuck is this?" And that is exactly the reaction that I think everyone should have to that song. That song should be excised from the catalog.
I disagree, but I want to go back to the past. That song really is one of the great Rush songs. It really is. I just have to say that it's a great song.
Okay, you're not going to distract me. I'm not going to let go of this bone of Roll the Bones. It sucks and shouldn't be on here or any other live album. And Driven,
you just don't like polyester slacks. Come on.
And then the last thing one thing that you'll notice though is they actually truncate the rap. They do truncate the rap. It is not 2 verses long like it is on the album. So you miss some of the cringiest stuff.
I think they did the full one, but by the second verse, people were booing and they just had to cut it all out. So they went right into it.
Yeah. The night has 1,000 saxophones, Rob. Always remember that. And then my last kind of criticism on the set list here is that I feel like the section that goes from Driven to Dreamline, so basically Driven, Ghost Rider, Secret Touch, and Dreamline, that whole little section, you could just cut out. You could probably cut out One Lit of Victory as well. This may be a little bit of back catalog bias, right? Like I like the fan service stuff a little bit well, and this is these are contemporary songs at that point. But I just don't. I found that section. That is the section of the set that I would have gone to get a beer, because I would only drink one beer during the set.
Okay, I mean that's fine. It's a good time to get a beer.
Okay.
What, you've taken a leak while you went and got your beer?
And then leave that thing alone. I mean, it doesn't need to be in there, but I know they like to lead into the drum solos with these instrumentals. Anyway, I would say that this is a missable live album. I would actually recommend that if you were if you're a completist, you want to have every album in your catalog. But obviously, this is not the days where people actually had physical copies generally. But if you wanted to be a completist, obviously you get it. But this is probably the last of all of their live albums that I would recommend to somebody.
Yeah, no, I get it. I do like the fact that the drum solo is called O Baterista, which is basically in Portuguese means the drummer.
Yeah, well, that it's accurate.
Yeah,
it's accurate. Okay, so Raf, are we ready to move on?
Daniel, I think we are. I think we're making good time. Yeah. This next
EP that we're going to cover is Feedback. This is their EP of covers. It was released in 2004. Before we get into it, Ralph, I'm going to tell you, of all of the records that we had to listen to for this week and do notes on, this was the one I was most worried about. I had never heard it, but I really... All right, let me save it until we actually listen. Rafi, Feedback. I want to hear you pick a song to play us into it. Any of the songs on here, it's your choice, Rafi. You are the captain. I will call that. You are the captain, and you will call the chart. I will just sit here and listen.
Searching
right, that was The Seeker from Feedback. So
right.
Dan, what do you think?
All right, so I'm just generally skeptical of these records. I think this is something that rock bands, when they get to be very big, do. Right? They do covers EPs or covers albums. And I think most of the time they suck. I really do. There are some exceptions. I think there can be exceptions in two different ways, basically. One, they play songs that lots of people know, but they do it in a very unique and unusual way. Right? That's always really interesting to me. Mm-hmm. The second, the second way that I think, and let me go back. I'm going to actually say GNR Lies is an example of covers EP. It's not all covers, but it's some covers on there where their approach to the songs is kind of interesting. Then there is another approach, which I would say that Metallica did in the Garage Days kind of EPs, where they cover songs that are influences to the band, but are mostly unknown to the band's fan base, right? So it's like, Metallica is covering Cannibal Corpse, or who I don't remember what all is on Garage Days, but like they're mostly really obscure bands, you know what I'm saying? And so their fan base has probably never heard of them. And so I think it's a really fun, interesting, kind of cool way to expose your fan base to music that they may have never heard of before. So I really like that approach as well. One of the reasons I was really worried about this EP is Rush took neither of those approaches. These are generally straight ahead versions of all of these songs. And these are songs that are very well known. Like everybody knows these songs and everybody knows these bands, with the possible exception of Love, but it is not like Love is like a cult. I mean, Love is a pretty fucking big band from the 60s. So I had some concerns, Roth.
I shared your concerns. First of all, I am not a fan of this era of music, like the 60s.
The 60s. Really?
I'm not. No, I'm not. I just don't, I don't know what it is. Like, I don't like that whole psychedelic look and everything. And secondly, clearly the band is thinking of their own mortality by this stage. And this is almost like a bookend, right? I don't know if they had designs to create a new album, so this is about 3 years before Snakes and Arrows, about 2 years after Vapor Trails. I don't know what their plans were. I think, like we said, I think they just were taking it year by year, day by day. And when they felt inspired to songwrite, they convened over wine and dinner and said, let's do this. I kind of feel this album would have made more sense to me, and I think I would have been more into it if they, and this might be sacrilege to say, but if they got John Rutsey to play on it. Right. If they brought him back to like play on this album, because like to me, it's like they're going back to the Garage Days, right? They're going back to the basement, and Neil wasn't part of the band then. And they were a very different band when they played this. Yeah. Now, Neil was probably listening to the same music, and he was probably just as into this. And I'm sure his influence on the set list is also very much there. But it just feels like
well-known Who fan, for example. He was a well-known Who fan.
Yeah, I mean, even if it was for like a couple of tracks, I mean, he was around. I'm assuming he was still playing drums, at least well enough to play this. But I kind of feel like it would have been cool to bring Rutsey back into the fold for this album, and to me, it would have been like a really cool gesture. And I would have loved to have heard what like Summertime Blues would sound like with Geddy, Neil, and John playing it, or Geddy, Alex, and John playing it.
Yeah, I that's an interesting way to look at it. I'm going to go through the track list really quick, because then I'm going to make a track list comment, but I want to make sure people understand what's actually on the album. So starts off with Summertime Blues by Eddie Cochran, Heart Full of Soul, which is the Yardbirds, Roth, obviously Yardbirds, Led Zeppelin connection. I don't want to trigger you, but Led Zeppelin connection. For What It's Worth, Buffalo Springfield. The Seeker by The Who, Mr. Soul by Buffalo Springfield, 7 and 7 is by Love, The Shapes of Things by the Yardbirds, and Crossroads by Robert Johnson, because that song hasn't been covered enough. So my big criticism, I think, with the track list and the track list choice is that I guess number one, my first criticism is too many of these songs are too well known, right? And so it's just very difficult to listen to for what it's worth and not feel like, unless you do a completely different approach to for what it's worth, it's kind of like, yeah, but Buffalo Springfield did it and it's kind of like perfect for what it is. It's such an iconic song.
At least it's not a cover of Jeff Buckley's cover of Hallelujah. Yeah. That's probably the most overdone.
Well, Jeff Buckley's cover of Hallelujah is a cover of John Cale's cover of Leonard Cohen's song.
Yeah, so it's
Jeff Buckley's is the best. But anyway, so I think that they would have benefited from maybe doing slightly more obscure songs that everyone does, that not everyone knows. I also think that one of the things I hated about this track list is that they did 2 Buffalo Springfield songs and they did 2 Yardbirds songs. It's like, guys, you're not digging deep at all. You basically, there are a lot of songs that I'm sure you guys loved that not that many people know from this era that you could have done and introduce people to or surprised people that was an influence, just made it a little bit more of something that fans would get a little bit more out of. I would, I can't think of a good song right now, but if they had put Scarborough Fair on here, I don't know what it would have sounded like, but I would have been like, fuck, it's surprising to me that Rush loves that song, but I think it's really cool. It would just teach me more about the band somehow. But all these songs are just kind of these are the obvious songs that anybody who existed during that time of, during that era is gonna know and these are basically I think it's hard to think of songs that are more popular than this. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, and
if they had done Pinball Wizard instead of The Seeker, I would have
But they have to be just straightforward driving rock songs. I mean, that's what it is. I mean, it's recorded. It sounds really good.
I think it sounds great.
But it's just I'm just not a fan of that era and of these songs, quite honestly. I don't have any nostalgia for them, and I'm not saying they're bad songs. I just don't, what, songs that I played growing up, to me, and I guess they do play they do play the Who, like the Who, for me, the Who song that is nostalgic that I played in bands was The Naked Eye. But that to me is the one that I would play. But again, not the more obvious ones, but they're.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I just think that the track list itself could have been much more interesting in some way. This really kind of feels like these guys got together in a studio and were like, what songs do you remember from the 60s? And then they just kind of started shouting out songs, and then, they all knew these. And so they just recorded them. But all of that said, all of my shit talking about the track list choices aside, I would agree with you, Raf. I think it's a very good sounding album. I think these are very competent covers of all of these songs. The guitar is really heavy and interesting, and the drums are really understated on this album, which I think is interesting to hear from Neil. It's not something you hear from Neil very often. So there are some merits here, but I think the track list is kind of shitty.
I agree. Next album.
Okay, we're gonna move on. So feedback, we're gonna say, again, it's good
C+,
that they made
B minus.
It's good that they made it an EP. This is not, if you don't own this album in your Rush catalog, I don't think you should flagellate yourself for that.
But let's put ourselves back into context too. Okay, so they did Vapor Trails, which was this muddy mix. Yeah. And my literal thought was, what the fuck, when I first heard it. Then they come out with Russian Rio with this, pterodactyl on the cover drinking booze, which I'm like, what the fuck? Especially how slow it is. And then they come out with Feedback, right? So I wonder how many fans they lost or were scratching their heads, right?
Well, I mean, era. Listen, it does seem like they were pretty, this was a rough era for them.
Now, if you listen to the previous 2 episodes and you heard our Snakes and Arrows episodes, they clearly redeemed themselves and got back on top, even, taking their entire catalog into consideration. They still got back up on that horse. But just really, this was an era of Rush where you're just kind of like, huh? Like that cat, the cat, huh?
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah.
You still don't know that meme.
It's not good. All right. So
anyway.
All right, Roth, it's time. Speaking of snakes and arrows, it is time for us to set sail. We're going to set sail to the year 2008 when Snakes and Arrows Live was released. Nothing else to say about that. Why don't we just give it a listen, Roth? Let's go.
Wheels can take you around. Wheels can cut you down. You can go from road to bust, from dreams to a bowl of dust. We can walk from rockets red glare down to brother. Can you spare another one stop? Another lost generation.
Snakes and Arrows Live, 2008. Dan.
Yeah.
So the album art, I actually like it better than the Snakes and Arrows studio album art. It's the highway.
Okay. Yeah, I would agree with that, Roth. I would agree with that, with the exception of the curves ahead street sign with bullet holes in it. I don't like that, or I would have liked that if it were actually if it were like in the photo. It's not a photo, it's a rendered image, right? But like, if it were made to look like that sign actually appeared at the side of the road, I would prefer this a little bit better. But I would agree. I think this is a more Rush-like image and a pretty good cover.
Now, interesting choice of opening track, though, Limelight. Have we heard this before as an opening track on a Rush live album?
I do not believe we have. I mean,
great track, but it's not like what you would think of as being an opening. It's like a second song, but not an opening song.
Yeah. It is an interesting track. Why don't we, while we're talking about the track list, why don't we just go through the whole thing? So, Roth.
It's pretty subdued up front. You want to read through it?
Sure. Limelight, Digital Man, Entree New, Mission, Free Will, The Main Monkey Business, The Larger Bowl, Secret Touch, Circumstances, Between the Wheels, Dreamline, Far Cry, Working Them Angels, Armor and Sword, Spindrift, The Way the Wind Blows, Subdivisions, Natural Science, Witch Hunt, Malignant Narcissism going into the drum solo, Hope, Distant Early Warning, Spirit of the Radio, Tom Sawyer, One Little Victory, A Passage to Bangkok, and YYZ. So, Roth. And then one more little piece of background information before we dig in. This was recorded in 2007 in Rotterdam, obviously on the Snakes and Arrow tour. I'm going to start off in my commentary here by saying I dislike that they abandoned, really with Rush and Rio. I think one of the cool things about Rush and their live albums was they always had really kind of interesting names of the albums. Right?
Yeah.
A Show of Hands, Exit Stage Left, All the World's a Stage, Different Stages. I love that. And it just kind of feels like they gave up on trying to come up with clever names for their live albums. Now it's just like Rush and Rio, Snakes and Arrows Live, Grace Under Pressure Live. I do miss that. It's a minor quibble, but it is a quibble I have.
No, I respect that quibble. It's not a quibble to me. But, you're seen, you're heard.
Okay,
so
thank you,
please
Rob.
don't go shoot
all
up
I want is to be seen, Rob. I just want to be seen. Okay, so this is, again, I think noticeably slower than the 70s and 80s albums, but this one feels better to me than Rush and Rio. What do you think?
I agree. And you know what? This was a time, as I mentioned with the Snakes and Arrows episode, where I mean, by the time this album came out, I was no longer working at the record company. I was working at a film studio. But it comes at a time where I was reinvigorated as a lifelong Rush fan, and now an adult with a family. By the time, I was still 2 years. I was married by this time, but I didn't have a family. But it rekindled my enthusiasm for the band. So when this album came out, I was excited to hear it. Right? I'm not usually, I'm not really that into live albums. I don't know. Like I don't. Yeah, I don't. Especially with a band like Rush, right? If it's like a jazz artist where they're, clearly going to go off on a tangent and like that's sort of the art in of itself, like, yeah, I'm more into that. But I'm not like super into live albums. But I can say that this was like, whereas the band seemed to be sort of heading into the sunset with their previous 3 releases, like studio EP and live albums, this was one where you're like, okay, they have momentum and we're going to see more output from these guys. Because if you recall, there were years, especially when Neil sort of went off the grid, where people thought, does Neil Peart have cancer? Remember, that was like a rumor that was going around because he started wearing those like skull caps and, and he was very svelte because he's very athletic. He bikes everywhere. But, there was a period of time where we thought this was it. This was the end. And the band's own output sort of, reinforced that with what they put out, subtly or otherwise. So for me, this was, I felt like a Rush fan again, and I enjoyed listening to it. But it's not something that I reach for on a regular basis. The quality of the audio, the sound, the performances, again, I think just up there amongst their better recordings. But the track listing is the one thing that always stuck out to me as being a little weird. Like it's like completely new. Like we haven't really seen this. I mean, think about it. Limelight, Digital Man, Entre Nous, Mission, Free Will. Like there's no real things to get people up in those first songs. It's very like European, almost as if they're playing to a seated crowd who's there to with their glasses on to listen to classical music, right?
It is a weird start to the show. Limelight obviously is such a well-loved Rush song that people are going to like it, but I would agree with you. I think it's a little bit more of a second or third song in a set list.
Well, look at the last track, Spirit of Radio, Tom Sawyer, One Little Victory, Passage to Bangkok, YYZ. Those are usually songs that you hear towards the head of a Rush album. And again, maybe that was a conscious decision. Like, hey guys, we always put those one out front. Why don't we do something else? Why don't we put these other ones out front?
Yeah, but it's an interesting. So like Digital Man, I think is an interesting song to play. Entre Nous, like, why would you put this in a live set list? Is anybody looking for this song to be played live?
I mean, I would be excited to hear Entre Nous live.
I would feel like I was robbed. The whole thing, the problem with Rush. Okay, here's, as I was going through the set lists for all these live albums, the problem with Rush is there are so many fucking songs that I want to hear live that if they stuck a song like Entre Nous in, I would have been like, guys, I understand we have a limited amount of space in the set list. Why are you wasting it on Entre Nous when like you could be playing Jacob's Ladder, you could be playing fucking The Trees, you could be there are so many other songs that you could be playing The Past. Like there are so many other songs that I would rather hear than that I feel like it's a crime to include it in the set list. Now I will say Mission is one of their best songs live. I think I fucking love that song live.
Yeah.
I think that the version of Circumstances in this is fucking killer. I love the version of Circumstances on this record. And I can't remember whether Circumstances appears on All the World's a Stage or Exit Stage Left, but it is great on here. And it's interesting. I really was trying to like suss out the slower tempo and more groovy kind of approach that they have in these later live performances, how it impacted Circumstances. And for me, it just made the song even better. I just fucking love that song on here. I love that they did it. And Roth, they went from Circumstances into Between the Wheels, which is another one of my favorite songs. I love to hear that in this set list.
Yeah. They did play around with the set list, and we haven't seen this before. So that to me made it more interesting, because there was a period of time where you kind of got the same thing.
Yeah.
And then they started mixing it up by putting like all of 2112 into a live album. So I think that this is very indicative of the band, where they are in their level of maturity and wanting to mix it up. And in that respect, since it is, the guys are now all over the hill, I think that it made sense that they did a more civilized, almost subdued set list for a show in the Netherlands. And maybe they did Entre Nous because they're like, okay, we're close enough to a French speaking country that people might speak French.
I would hope not. The other thing that I think is interesting to note is they play a lot of songs off Snakes and Arrows here, which is understandable because they're on the tour. They're on tour promoting Snakes and Arrows. But these songs hold up against the back catalog so much better than so many of the kind of mid-era 1990 through 2000 songs tend to. There's a lot of Snakes and Arrows on here, and I wasn't resentful of that much of it. Right? It worked pretty well for me. I also wanted to ask you a question.
Go ahead. You're welcome to.
Passage to Bangkok. As you know, one of my favorite Rush songs, Ralph. Did they drop the key to this song completely in this? Geddy is definitely singing some lines a little bit differently than he does originally, but this is the only song that I listened to and I was like, gosh, I think they might have just dropped the key of this from the original version.
Hang on a second. Which track?
Passage to Bangkok.
No, it's the exact same key as the 2112 recording. It's just it's sluggish. I can play both riffs side by side, and I'll do that here.
All right, why don't we all listen, Ralph? Why don't we just edit that right in? Let's fucking give it a listen.
See what I'm saying?
Okay. Well, maybe it was just the way that Geddy's kind of singing those lower lines or something that threw me off, and the pace of it.
It could be the sound that he sounds like a beached whale as he's trying to hit those high notes.
I mean, it really he does navigate around him as best as possible, but it's there's no denying at this point that he's lost that like banshee scream that he used to have.
Yeah.
Or he can only use it like very sparingly. But listen, that's okay. He's an older guy at that point.
Yeah, he's still fucking Geddy. He rocks. I was going to that was my third choice of license plate, Geddy Lee.
All right. Well, Ralph, anything else that we want to talk about with Snakes and Arrows Live, or do you want to move on to our last live album that we're going to cover in this episode, Ralph? Are you ready?
Let's do it.
All right, Ralph. Grace Under Pressure Live, released in 2009. Let's hear a little sniglet.
All right, so it's interesting that this is the last one, yes. 2009. And after this, of course, we have Clockwork Angels was recorded. This was recorded in 1984 in a venue that I saw Rush play, Presto, which to me is the mecca of Rush venues, although it probably isn't. It would probably be Massey Hall might be the mecca, but it was at Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto. No longer exists. It's now Air Canada Centre, the new venue. But it was Maple Leaf Gardens, downtown Toronto, 1984. So even though this comes last in terms of like the release date, that's why it's last here. It was actually recorded decades earlier, in 1984. And many of you may know this from the video. There was a video that came out, with the Geddy with the gray jacket and the Steinberger and Alex. They were all, there was very 80s. It was like Rush at their peak 80s. Neil had like a ponytail, rat tail, you might want to call it. And this is the recorded version of that performance, which to me is arguably the greatest Rush performance recorded. It's fantastic. Like that, maybe Exit Stage Left, but this is certainly up there with like the great Rush performances of all time. In my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, is this the band at the absolute height of its powers as a band?
I mean, just the Steinberger and the rat tails alone, I think, verify that as an objective fact. It's not subjective. It's an objective fact.
I think you could definitely have a discussion about it, but there is no denying the band is like, as a band playing together, they are really firing on all cylinders in this live performance. Now, let's go through the set list, Ralph, because I want to find out a few. I want to find out a few things from you about how you feel about this. So they start off with Spirit of the Radio, much more traditional.
They start off with they start off with the Three Stooges intro.
Yeah, which they use through Show of Hands anyway, right?
Yeah. And which I think is brilliant. I loved it. I loved that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they used that for a really long time. So they start off with that, and then they go into Spirit of the Radio, which is a more traditional, I think, opener for the band. Mm-hmm. Then they go right into the Fear trilogy, and they play the entire trilogy, Enemy Within, The Weapon, Witch Hunt. At this point, they don't even realize that they will later in their lives go on to completely fuck up the Fear trilogy by doing a fourth one that sucks.
But let's just acknowledge how bold that is, that they just go right into that. Like after Spirit of the Radio, they just go right into it.
I know, which is pretty bold, right? I mean, they're hitting all of the new songs right off the bat, right? Mm-hmm. Like they are going Enemy Within, The Weapon, Witch Hunt. Then they go right into New World Man, Distant Early Warning, Red Sector A, and that's it. Like this is a tight little live set, right? Then they do all the fan service stuff where they do Closer to the Heart, YYZ, Tom Sawyer, Vital Signs.
Well, and YYZ, Temples of Syrinx, and Tom Sawyer. So Temple of Syrinx coming from 2112, of course. That's how you could hear 2112 live for so long, for like decades. Like they would just play like Overture and maybe Temples of Syrinx, and that was it. Yeah. So that and it was all thrown up into a medley like that they did in this one.
Yeah, and it really feels like what they're trying to do here. I mean, it feels to me like a band constructing a set list that realize they've got these hardcore fans from the 70s who love the prog stuff, right? Love the more metal stuff. They've moved in a very different direction. So they jam all of the new stuff that they want to play. Yeah. They do one fan favorite. They jam it all in real quick. And then they end with like total fan service for the end of the set to leave people with like a positive feeling, which I think is interesting because these songs from like Grace Under Pressure and that era, so many of them have gone on to become huge fan favorites much later.
They have. And I think we should also remind people, this is just a selection of tracks. Like they didn't just do a 45-minute set. Like there was probably like a 2.5-hour set. So they probably played a lot more. At this point? I think it was a much longer. It had to have been at least an hour and a half. They would have had an opener. I don't know if they had openers towards the end. They probably had openers. It was.
I read this actually this week when I was
brought it up once. Yeah,
they brought it up, and I can't remember what it was, but it wasn't until relatively late in the career that they started doing an evening with Rush, which is what they called the first time they did it, where it was like two. They took a break in the middle. There was an intermission. They did 2 sets, and there was no opener.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've seen Rush with an opener, so they would have had an opener for this. They would have at least played for twice as long as this album. I guaranteed. Yeah. I mean, again, we can go to that tour website and see what this actual night where they actually played.
Yeah.
In fact, that would be pretty awesome to. What was that website again?
I can't remember. We'll find that and look it up. But yeah, so then they go into the fan service stuff. So overall, I would say that like I think this is a great album. In my kind of dream compilation of Rush releases. I wish that they would do an album like this, a live album like this, now for every tour throughout their entire career. Do like a 45-minute condensed live set for every tour in their career and release the whole thing as like a box set, right? So you basically go from the beginning of the band to the end of the band, but the sets are all like, you know, basically like what they do for Snakes and Arrows, Grace Under Pressure. They later do it for Clockwork Angels. I think I would really like that in a single kind of release so that you could really listen to them tour by tour rather than these mixed up live albums where you're trying to figure out what tour was this on. I think that would be a cool, I'm sure that release is never going to happen. They probably didn't record, you know, for like release quality recordings for every tour. But I do think that would be a cool document to have for the band.
Yeah, so it's interesting because so I'm looking at the set list on Cygnus X1, Cygnus. Did I say Cygnus? I said Cygnus. Cygnus X1.
Guys, that's CYNGUS X1.net.
Okay, so looking at it, intro, Spirit of Radio, then they played Tom Sawyer. Interesting, because here it just puts Tom Sawyer, and then it says Digital Man, right?
Okay.
Which was not on the album, right?
Yeah.
Then Kid Gloves, pre-release version.
Okay.
Right? Then Subdivisions.
Okay.
Oh wait, I'm sorry, I'm reading the wrong tour. Sorry.
Okay.
Here we go. Okay, intro, then the Spirit of Radio. Okay, then Subdivisions, which is not on it. So the Subdivisions was left off.
Yeah.
Then the Body Electric, which was also left off.
Yeah.
Then they go into the Fear trilogy.
Yeah.
Then they go into New World Man.
Have included Body Electric in this because that's a great song.
Then they did New World Man, which is on it. Then they did Between the Wheels and Red Barchetta, which are left off.
Should have included both of those, but go ahead.
Yeah. Then they did Distant Early Warning, Red Sector A, Closer to the Heart. And then, this is interesting, After Image. But they only performed that through July 16th. And this took place in, September? And then they did Kid Gloves, but again, they only did that through September 14th. So they nixed Kid Gloves a week before they recorded this. Then they did YYZ 2112 Tom Sawyer, right? And then they did Red Lenses. So this was the encore. So that's how they ended the show. Then they did an encore. And this only started beginning October 18th, where they added Red Lenses. So they hadn't added Red Lenses yet. And then they had a drum solo that was added. So then is
a dumb addition. But go ahead.
And the encore. So those last songs, Vital Signs, Finding My Way, and In the Mood, those were part of the encore.
Yeah. Okay.
So they did leave a few songs out, some of the newer songs. So right. It is an edited show.
Hey, Ralph, give me 1 second.
Yeah, of course you can have more. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so it is a much longer set list, and it makes a little bit more sense the way you described the full set list. All right. Well, anyway, I think this is a great document. I really, in the same way that like really, Show of Hands was what tour was that capturing? That was the
Show of Hands was Hold Your Fire.
Tour. Or Hold Your Fire tour.
Yeah.
That's right. Hold Your Fire tour. So, I mean, that really feels like a document of that time and the end of that era. But, now that they're doing these individual tour live albums, I would actually like to see them do more of them. And I'd like to have as complete a picture of what the band did across all these tours as possible. May not be possible, right? I would imagine at this point, it starts to feel like what they're doing is emptying out the vault during this period, figuring out ways to release everything they've got out there. And
what I find interesting about this album, though, is because when we discuss Grace Under Pressure, it's one of those weird albums where for a lot of Rush fans, it's by far the best produced Rush album for a lot of them. I think it's excellent. The production quality is excellent. I don't deny that, but I don't put it in the upper pantheon of my favorite sounding Rush albums. And it's a very dark album, as we discussed. Yeah. And to me, it was a little like it wasn't, the band was kind of neither here nor there from the previous era to the next one. And to me, it was a prototypical album that was more fully realized on Power Windows. But what's remarkable is because the difference between their live album and the studio album of the same name, like
Yeah.
by far, like I just gotten done saying I don't like live albums, but for this one, like by far I prefer. By far I prefer the Grace Under Pressure live album to. I shouldn't say to the studio album, but as a live album, it's one that stands on its own.
All right. Well, yeah, opinion. I think it's a good live album as well. But Rafi, is that it?
Yeah.
We're at the end. Oh, the last thing I want to say about this one is I particularly appreciated the version of New World Man on here. I felt like the version of New World Man on this album was really, really good in a way that sometimes live recordings can really bring something to the song that you don't get on the recorded version. New World Man is not one of my favorite Rush songs in the studio, but I really did like it on this live album more than I like the studio version, which for me is not something that I can say regularly about Rush songs. But
I agree. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So Raf, are we done? Did we get all the way through the ephemera of late era Rush?
I think we did. And I'm excited to go into next week's episode, which is going to be Clockwork Angels, which is directly... It's a unique album. It's their last album, studio album. And it's going to be fun to chat about that.
I can't wait. I've never heard it. I have managed to avoid it completely. So I am going to I'm going out to Weed Whack after this recording, and I'm going to be listening to Clockwork Angels while I am weed whacking, my friend.
And a little teaser though about Clockwork Angels. So I listened to that a lot, almost exclusively when it came out in San Francisco, because I was working for a startup which was based out of. So we would have been listening to it.
Do you remember? Hold on. I want to say something like that. Do you remember during that period of time? You were living in LA. I was living outside of San Francisco in Half Moon Bay, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I had been in San Francisco at that point for quite a while. Yeah. I hadn't lived in LA since 2001. Right. So, I mean, I'd been in San Francisco for quite a while.
True.
I was not seeing you regularly at all. Right.
No. But
one day I walked out. I was also working, right? I was working with this company.
Right. Yeah.
I walked out of the fucking company's
on Howard Street. Yeah, you were in the same building. Street,
and I literally bumped into you on the sidewalk.
That's right. I guarantee you, I was listening to Clockwork Angels on the ride from the airport to Howard Street that morning. Guaranteed.
That's funny.
Guaranteed. Funny. So it all comes together.
It does all come together. So Raf, but so I am excited to be here at Clockwork Angels, but we're not finished, Raf.
No,
we're not finished. You thought you were going to be able to get away from this question, the most important question, the pop quiz, the final exam, the fucking SATs. Raf, what is Rush's best live album ever?
I mean, I think I just said it. I would say Grace Under Pressure.
So you're going to say that including Show of Hands, Exit Stage Left, All the World's a Stage, you are going to say Grace Under Pressure Live is your favorite Rush live album ever.
And I have no reservations about saying that. Yes.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, that's the wrong answer, Raf. I am sorry. Sorry. No.
Rush in Rio. Is that the right answer?
The correct answer for the best live album in the entire catalog, of course, is
Exit Stage Left.
Exit Stage Left.
Okay, it's my second. Yeah, it's up there.
I would say of the albums that we covered in this episode, the best live album is Snakes and Arrows Live, Raf. You fucked that one up. I am sorry.
Okay, so Grace Under Pressure isn't even in your top two then.
No, but I do think it is a great live album. If I had a top three, I would. Well, of their entire catalog, I don't think I'd put it in the top three either, but I would probably put it in the top 5 of their live albums.
Oh,
but now listen, Rafi, I think there's one thing we can agree on. And that is, what is the worst live album that Rush has ever released? Rafi, before you answer, think carefully. What is the worst live album that Rush has ever released?
Exit Stage Left, of course. No, I'm kidding. I would have to go with Rush and Rio.
Yeah,
sorry to
Ralph, that is absolutely right.
Yeah.
It is not a good live album. It is not a good live album from soup to nuts, really.
It's a great story. It's a great, part of their evolution, but as a live album, yeah.
I think the only thing I would recommend anyone to really do with Rush and Rio is, number one, take the cover out of the CD jewel case and throw it in the trash because the cover is so horrible. And then the second thing is just listen to the pass. The version of the pass on this and the fact that they're playing the pass live, it makes you really appreciate once again how good a song that is. But really, I think the rest of the album you can pretty much trash. So I'm going to say.
Yeah, I mean, get yourself a caipirinha and get drunk on that and listen to the album, and it'll be fine.
All right, Rafi, as always, my friend, it has been a real pleasure. We are about to embark on the recording of our final episodes on the final studio albums that Rush has ever recorded. We are close to the finish line.
We are. And then we got our bracket as the final episode.
Yep, we got to make up the brackets. The Tournament of Champions and the Tournament of Losers. So we're going to do that. Raf, why don't you tell our many fans how to get in touch with us?
Look, I'm going to cut right to the chase here. Let's talk man to man and man to woman. If you really want to help this podcast, you'll be telling all your friends, you'll be talking to strangers on the street. You'll be on the subway. You'll say, hey, have you listened to the Backtracking podcast featuring Rush? Well, and then you open up your trench coat and you show them where they can find us. And that would be Backtracking Rocks, ROX, on X.com, formerly known as Twitter. On Instagram, you could find us there. You could follow us. You could look at the pretty pictures we post. And you can even email us at backtrackingrocks@gmail.com. And that email goes directly to Dan's inbox. In fact, he's wired to receive an electric shock every time you email that email. So please do that so Dan gets some use out of this electric shock machine that he bought. Like the show, smash that like button, share it with your friends, write a review as long as it's 5 stars. We would love to hear that review. Fawn over us, tell us how great we are. Our egos really could use the boost. So thank you so much for listening, and we really look forward to giving you our last 3 episodes coming up over the next 3 weeks here on the Rush Backtracking Podcast.
Thank you so much, Roth. That was an amazing outro. We will see you again next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.